meeting to order, and we'd like to invite Chief Bleimeistre up to educate us on his topic.
Do we need to do Open Meetings Act notice?
Oh, I'm sorry, and everybody knows that the Open Meetings Act is posted at the rear of the hearing room.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Welcome.
This is Officer Luke Bonkowitz, and Luke has a lot of expertise in this particular area. So the reason I just even wanted a little bit of time is to kind of showcase all of the different partnerships that the Lincoln Police Department has outside of our agency. And really every one of them is just an effort to look at what we do. Are we doing things the way that we should be? And have a fresh set of eyes. Maybe there is something that we can be doing a little bit better. And it also, it's this procedural justice model where we are seeking input a lot of times from the people that we serve and incorporating that into our policies, our practices, and our training. And so this is just kind of a summary of the different partnerships that we have with some higher educational facilities going on right now. First is the national level youth gang membership risk factors in Lincoln Public Schools. And we are partnering with UNL Center on Children, Families, and the Law. And what this particular program looks at is it's assessing gang membership risk factors across 5 developmental domains. Basically, if we can predict what brings about youth gang membership, then we should be able to prevent it. And we can share this information with our community partners, such as LPS, to promote awareness and action. Right now, we are partnering, and Luke is doing a lot of the heavy lifting on this particular project, with Carrie Gensler and Danelle DeBoer from Doane College. And what we've asked for them is to complete an analysis from outside the walls of the Lincoln Police Department to look at our hiring process, from application through the offer of employment. Are we being fair? And we're looking at ethnicity, gender, and even a deeper dive into, are we being fair to people that have differing work histories, things like that. And they are still in the process of completing that particular analysis. Another one that has just been completed, and this is a very interesting study, done again by Carrie Gensler and Danelle DeBoer, and it looks at the use of control data, so use of force data, and assaults on Lincoln police officers. Researchers from outside our organization provide a level of transparency. They are not our employees. They aren't paid based upon if they please us with their answers. We're just looking for independent assessment. So their research looked at 390 different use of control incidents between 2014 and 2016. It analyzed 352 assaults on officers in the last 6 years. So in the last 6 years, not including this year, 352 Lincoln police officers have been assaulted. And really, you know, I can't stress enough, and I talk about this all the time in the media, sometimes the media expects, well, that's just part of your job, that's what you signed up to do, and there's nothing farther from the truth. Our officers should not be assaulted for what they're doing.
Chief Bleimeistre, could you say that again? 352 LPD officers have been assaulted just this past year?
No. Since 2010 to 2016.
Okay.
I think the last time I looked, we were somewhere in the neighborhood of about 40 so far this year. But what Carrie Gensler and Danelle DeBoer looked at is, so they're providing us findings on demographics. What are the demographics of the people that we're using force on, that are assaulting our officer? What were the suspect's behaviors immediately preceding the assault? What were the level of injuries to the officer and to the suspect? What was one of the key findings that they did come up with is that the overall use of control on average was lower than the suspect's resistance, which is something that's very good in the policing world. And then they also talked about how when encounters grow to the ground, so when the officer and the suspect go to the ground, in a majority of the cases, both are likely to be injured. We take all of this information and then we put it into our policies and especially into our training practices. So that's where it provides so much benefit. Some of the other ones that we got going on right now. Dr. Brandon Helding, he is looking at racial disparity in traffic stops. Dr. Brandon Helding was originally, and I'm not going to use the word employee, he came to us with the ACLU, and they wanted to look at our traffic stop data, and we gave them everything. Well, for whatever reason, there was a parting of ways between the ACLU and Dr. Brandon Helding. And then Dr. Helding comes later on to us and says, you know, I have this information. This is a worthwhile project. We can't pay you. We can't pay him because, one, that'd be a conflict of interest, really. And two, we don't have the money to pay for something like that. But he is analyzing, independent of anybody at the Lincoln Police Department, all of our traffic stop data. And his report is coming in late 2017. We partnered with Colleen Cadlick with the University of Nebraska, Officer Perspectives on Being Filmed by Citizens. And our officers and sergeants, 29 of them, participated in focus groups and interviews. And what came out of that one is that most officers did not report filming as a common occurrence. We're talking about cell phone. Apparently they are not downtown very often then, because every Friday and Saturday nights when we look at other videos, you can see the lights of cell phones being held up when there's an incident that's occurring. There was only minor changes reported in behavior because of the video, but they all talked about how a viral video effect may impact both the officer and the citizen. Another partnership with the UNL Center on Children, Families, and the Law is Project Success Restore. And this also goes with Sarah Hoyle with Human Services. And it's an intervention diversion program to prevent youth from deeper immersion into the criminal justice system. And really another big point of this was try to reduce the racial disparities that occur in the infancy, because we're talking about 7th to 10th graders, localized to middle and high schools, and 2 different offenses that we're looking at, assault and disturbing the peace. And so really these individuals, they're held accountable. They don't get a pass if they're involved in this particular kind of behavior. But if they aren't already on probation or diversion for some other kind of offense, then restorative justice practices are employed. They're given this particular choice. We get their family involved, and we're really looking hard at, does that prevention of a deeper dive into the criminal justice element itself prevent them from having other things future in their life? Problem-oriented policing, the Burn Jag Pass-Through Grant. So this one is a really interesting study and something that we do all the time. We look at very small reporting districts. And those of you that are familiar with how, we talked a lot about reporting districts in our analysis on team boundaries. We're taking small ones, one on the Northwest team, one on the Northeast team, and then we go back in history and we use all Part 1 crimes, so murder, robbery, rape, theft, auto theft, for that reporting district for a series of years, and also all narcotic-related offenses for the number of years. And then we have 2 control groups on the Southwest team and the Southeast team. We use some practices to try to reduce narcotic and Part 1 crimes, police saturations, tracking of our communications between landlords and homeowners, community meetings, knock and talks, which is this a police strategy where there isn't enough. We have a report of a crime occurring, but we don't have enough to make an arrest, and we're going out knocking on the door and saying, Carl, did you steal this? Well, no, I didn't. Well, can we come in and take a look and make sure that this particular thing that we are alleging that you may have stolen isn't in your home? So it's a proactive approach. Neighborhood surveys and, again, community events. Lincoln Police Department is really, really good at community events, as evidenced by a couple this weekend with Catch a Cop on Saturday, and then Streets Alive. We had a big presence at Streets Alive in Belmont yesterday. Just a couple other things, and I brought Luke here because Luke has done some great, great work on the evaluation of the Mental Health Association's REAL program. Luke has done a study And that study found that there really was no effect when we make a referral to the MHA program, and that referral is, they make contact with the individual. There wasn't any reduction in the number of times these particular people were arrested in comparison to someone who was not contacted by an MHA representative in the 12 to 36 months following that contact. But there was a decrease, a significant decrease in the likelihood that these individuals would be, that there would be the subject of a call for service for a mental health investigation, and even better, that they would be placed in emergency protective custody. So what that shows is that the real program makes a difference. Luke also did an in-depth study looking at, hey, we changed our policy on impounding vehicles of suspended drivers. The real question that we looked at, does impounding the vehicles reduce recidivism among suspended drivers? And the analysis showed yes, in the next 6 months, it was reduced by 28%. So 28% less times individuals are driving when they have a suspended or a revoked license. And then finally, I think one of the best works that I've read, and you finished this in November of 2016, I believe.
About a year ago.
He took a deep dive, similar to what Dr. Brandon Helding is doing, into looking at the disparity in our traffic stops. Is there evidence of racial profiling occurring? We're asking ourselves these questions because the disparity exists. There's no argument there. And if there's something that we are doing, whether implicitly or explicitly, then we need to change that. And what Luke's analysis has shown, what another independent analysis has shown, is that we cannot prove that causation of profiling leads to that disparity. And that's why we've asked Dr. Brandon Helding to take a look at it too. And we have hypothesized other causations for that. The important part is that I was just in in Charlottesville, Virginia, 2 weeks ago, meeting with 50 plus police chiefs and sheriffs of similar sized agencies across the country. There aren't policing agencies around the country with these kind of partnerships. And I think it speaks volumes to the professionalism that we have here. So, questions?
There, yeah.
Go ahead.
You know, it's kind of a smorgasbord. There's a lot to choose from there that you've
Yeah.
thrown out. So in terms of gang issues, I think
Mhm.
that was one of the earlier things you mentioned. We're working with, who are some of the partners that are at the table when we're doing that work?
Good question. That one is the UNL Center on Children, Families, and the Law, but also the partnerships are going throughout with Operation Tipping Point. Our gang focus is multifaceted. So we have enforcement and suppression. We have education, which is a big part of what the gang unit does. And we also have the ability, we're searching for the ability to intercede. The younger the better, watching for these indicators that are being provided to us by this study, and then using our civilian representation in the gang unit to try to make and build relationships and offer other solutions. That gang affiliation is not the solution to meeting all of these deficiencies that may not be in your family structure. Is it perfect? It is not, but it really is an objective look and a way to try to make an impact.
And we, several years ago, due to budget challenges, we removed school resource officers from middle schools.
Yes.
And this is kind of the target group that you're looking at, right?
Yeah.
Okay. just approved a budget at our last meeting, so, but we go right into the new season. So is this something that you would like to see restored?
Great question, Carl. And I think 2010, 2011 was maybe the year that was. I think it was 2010, 2011 when that funding was removed. And although we'll never, I shouldn't say never, 12 or 13 middle schools, is that what there is in Lincoln? I'm trying to think off the top of my head, something like that.
No, yeah.
There was a proposal when I first became chief, and I think it is important. I think it's important for the building of relationships in a positive sense with officers at that young age. I don't know that it's so important that they're taking law enforcement action. You know, we can send officers from our geographic teams to be able to take that enforcement action, but the relationships that they build in a positive way, and almost as important, if not more important, is the relationship they build with the parents. So yes, that is something that we continue to look at. I have spoke in the past since in this role with Dr. Steve Joel, and we believe it's important. Again, it's always just a balance of where did those dollars go. So,
Okay, thanks.
Maureen?
Thank you so much. I mean, it's been impressive to hear these presentations in the past as well as today. Just, I want to say you were with us before. Alan Green, I think, was here talking about work done to have mental or behavioral health professionals follow up with people who've had contact with law enforcement. And I know you have to often respond to calls that then are actually really not for LPD, but better served by other agencies. So knowing that you're working in partnership, not just during those times, but on an ongoing basis, just gives me a lot of confidence that people have a better chance of getting their needs addressed. As you think about needs going into the next budget cycle, how does what you're learning through all these studies shape what you think you might want to, how you might, redirect or shape your request for resources? How do you think you might be looking at doing things differently at all, if at all, in the next 2 years based on what you're learning from, Luke's work, the partnerships with others?
I'll take a stab at that. These all are different, very specific areas of our operations that we're taking a look at. Really, when you analyze the 120,000 plus calls for service that we have every year, a very, very small percentage of those calls relate to actual crime itself. I mean, we're 70 to 80% of what we're doing really is more of a preserving the peace or interjection into the mental health world or trying to find a missing person. As far as how do we direct our resources, mental health is an ever-increasing call volume, and it's an ever-increasing load on our officers' time. But in the same breath, I have to say that we are so fortunate here in Lincoln because of the partnerships that we have with Bryan Health Systems, with the Bridge, with the Mission, with Scott Etherton and the Crisis Center. And we effectively utilize all of those different partnerships. Where I guess I really wasn't too prepared to talk about where we would place or modify resources. As a result of the Boundary Review Committee, we just are in the process of rebalancing the distribution of staffing levels to the geographic teams. And if approved, I think the final vote is maybe later today, or is that, yeah, it's later today. We already plan to place the 6 additional officers onto the geographic teams with 1 supervisor to try to enhance our response times and things like that. So, great question, and one that I'll continue to.
Sure, we'll all be talking about.
Yeah.
But maybe another question that is equally important but more internal is just how have some of the results of these studies as they come in shaped how you're refining the policies and practices within the department. You mentioned that it's going to be used to help, make your training better. What do you imagine is going to be changing or being enhanced?
Sure. The use of control report that Doan that they analyzed and that they gave back to us was the result of one original question, and it was the question asked by our defensive tactics instructor, and it was, what happens when our officers go to the ground with another individual? And out of that one question, we had probably 7 or 8 other bigger questions that came on top of it. But that kernel is really where it came out of, and that's where it's going to come back to. So kind of the real-world application, we know what happens when altercations go to the ground. Now, what are we going to do about it? What sort of ground defense planning or training are we going to implement for our officers? And it's not just for our officers. I mean, the report showed that when these altercations go to the ground, it's kind of a bad deal all the way around. Suspects are more likely to get injured. Officers are more likely to get injured. So if we can develop a training or a technique specifically for ground defense, that's going to alleviate injuries for officers, alleviate injuries for suspects, and frankly, that's the best thing that could happen. That's probably the best example that I could give of that. The other, speaking to what you said, how it's affected officers, officers, as are other criminal justice individuals, we're kind of skeptical by nature, right? The proof is in the pudding. We want to see what works. And it's nice to be able to go to officers in service and talk to them about mental health issues, because they're on one side that says, yes, we keep going back to this address and this person over and over again, and it's hard for them sometimes to take the long view. But if we can go to them with information and say, hey, look, we know that you're probably going to have to go back there a couple of times, but in 2 or 3 years, you may not have to go back there again. And if you refer them, they're going to give them resources. So 1, you're going to improve their quality of life. You're going to actually help them, which is what our mission is. And 2, just from a basic call for service standpoint, we may not have to go back there anymore. And it's nice to be able to give them statistics to say, if you refer this person, if you do X, you will not have to go back there Y number of times in the next 1 to 2 years. And I think that really helps. The studies are nice, all this information is important, but they want the bottom line. If I do this, what's going to happen? And it's nice to say, well, we have a study that says if you do these things, generally these other things are going to happen.
Empirical awareness results in buy-in from our officers. It really does. And that's a big part of what these things accomplish.
Chief Bleimeester, you had mentioned the Dr. Brandon Helding is looking at the disparities in traffic stops, and I know that you gave a presentation to a neighborhood group about this, and they offered their feedback as well, and their perception is the reality, and the numbers seem to substantiate some of their reality that they are seeing, and. But you also mentioned that Dr. Brandon Helding kind of veered away from the ACLU. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, or?
We don't know why.
Okay.
I can tell you this, and I think that this is an important part of the conversation. Because do not hear me, because I am not saying that I'm not speaking disparagingly at all about the ACLU. All I'm saying is we are as open and transparent. Here is all the information, and if you don't understand what this particular code means, we will explain it to you. And in fact, we'll sit down with you and meet with you and walk you through the process of how the traffic stop begins, the data collection, and then eventually the outputs. And so we're thankful that Dr. Helding on his own accord came back to us. Again, we're not a paying customer, and he has to put food on the table, as we all do, and so he'll get to it when he can. He has the information, and I know he's made progress because Luke has met with him, I've met with him.
Yes.
So.
Also, can you talk a little bit about your partnership with Doan College? You said about the application, I guess the selection and hiring process. Are we making headway, and when will that study be done?
I'll let Luke.
So we started both of these projects. We met with Doan this summer, and we had some ideas that we wanted to do. They had some ideas, so we came together and figured out what our two or three projects were going to be. And because of their schedule, teaching, and the availability of graduate students, they started with the use of control data because that data was immediately available. So that's why that one went first, because we had a database that was built for us by students. So we didn't collect the data. They built it for us. They gave it, we held on to it, and then we found a partner who could analyze it, and we gave it off to Doan. Now the second part of it, the hiring practices, the reason why that is a little bit delayed is because we are going, let me step back. We have 2 hiring cycles each year, one in the fall and then one in the spring. And we are going back a cycle and then tracking a current cycle, meaning we are tracking every individual as well as their demographics and what the result is from our prior 2 cycles. So if I apply, we're gonna start tracking demographics, their race, their age, their gender, their work history, their criminal history. We're tracking a variety of different things, and then we're seeing how this plays out in the hiring process. Interviews, testing scores, written scores, physical ability scores, conditional offer, polygraph. And so all this takes a lot of time to gather data, and so we're still in the middle of putting the final touches on that database. We have given an early draft of that database to make sure that everything is correct and it's been cleaned properly to Doan. They are on, not hiatus right now, but they're attending to their teaching needs, and I think it's probably going to be a couple of months before they start analyzing it. On my whiteboard in my office, I have February of 2018 for a final report for that.
And how many years are they going back and looking at that data?
Right now, it's kind of a pilot study. They're going back 2 cycles. So it will have roughly, this is just a ballpark, between 500 and 600 individuals. The nice thing that they have done for us is because we've gone through this process, they've built some infrastructure for us so we can continue to gather data on our next hiring processes going forward. And exactly, so the next one, we just put in those numbers and the database grows, it gives us more information, and we can continue to give it to Doan, or we can give it to another research partner who has questions or things that they want to look at, and things that we want to look at as well.
And really, it tells us, how do we modify our strategies? How do we modify to be able to fill classes with the best employees that we can recruit and that match the demographics of all of Lincoln that we serve?
I should also say, one of the longer term goals of this as well is to track officers who are applicants, not only from when they apply and go through the interview and if they get their conditional on their final offer, but also track their progress through the academy. So, you know, we hire all these people. Are these people turning out? Are they making it through the academy? How are they doing at FTO? And again, this is all information that we're going to give to Doan to analyze.
I would encourage you to also include 5-year retention after hiring.
Yes.
Yep. And in fact, Roy, we have done some, prior to this, unrelated. We had done some analysis on our 5-year retention guidelines as it compared to others, and we were well into the 80% numbers, which is pretty good. And when you consider the fact that many people leave one job and go to the next, and we really think that this is a profession and a choice that they've made for a lifetime. Good.
When you've gone to meet with others around the country or when you've published your work, have you encountered other best practices or examples of partnerships that might be valuable for Lincoln that we don't have in place? Are there things that you wish you could have in place that you don't?
One is this: all of these different things provide valuable input, but they take time, lots of time. There are other researchers that have come to us, and Luke and I can both sit here and think about others from UNL, because we are a data-rich environment. And a lot of society's hot topics revolve around policing. So one limiter is just because Luke is doing a lot of the work. He's providing them this information and getting them access to it. As far as other best practices as it comes to research partnerships, I really don't know, but aside from all of this, we are also a CLIA accredited agency since 1989. And every single year, we are analyzing our policy book, what we do in the field against the best practices nationally. And in fact, I met this morning, and we are changing and altering some of our policies and procedures based upon the newest recommendations from CLIA. And then, that has a cascading effect. It goes into our policy book, into our training, and then into practice and supervision on a daily basis. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers exactly what you're saying, but.
Got another question?
Yeah,
Carl?
yeah. I don't know that there's a way to study or analyze this question or comment. But it seems like sometimes when there's conflicts between law enforcement and the public, this isn't blaming. It's just what appears. Like sometimes the reaction on the side of law enforcement isn't defusing. It's kind of accelerating the conflict. What can be done? What is done to help officers when they're in those difficult situations to, for their good, for the other individuals, for the community? What can be done to help calm things at that point? Thank you.
De-escalation is key, and it is incorporated into not only our policies but our training. And although it's a buzz term currently in our profession, it has been part of the training for the Lincoln Police Department and for the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office for at least 20 years, 20 plus years that I've been involved, and probably much longer than that. But what you're saying is correct, and we witness it. We witness it because small snippets of video, as we talked about, capture these incidents, and then these incidents go viral, and it defines a profession, and we have to recognize that. So we have to have a constant recognition of we can do better. We can do better, and I think, and that requires buy-in. I can tell you that when we see these snippets of video from across the nation, we will take them and we'll sit down and we will tabletop them and say, could that happen in Lincoln, Nebraska? And oftentimes the answer is yes, that tragic events in volatile situations can happen. What can we do? As Jane mentioned, and it's not just the chief of police, but there's an expectation across our agency that we're out in the community, and we're not just out there standing post, but we're out there engaging the people that we serve, building those relationships, recognizing that bad things are going to happen, because they are, and then hopefully that trust has been built up over year after year, decade after decade, so when it does, that we'll hold ourselves accountable. And then it comes to that too. It takes administration to say, that was wrong, these employees did not act correctly, and they'll be held accountable. And in the same breath, if they did do things that were right, even if portrayed in a negative image, it's important for us to say that too, even if there is pushback on that kind of conversation.
Thank you.
Okay. Mary.
This is for you, Luke. The article that you published with Alan Green, Casey Moyer, and Joe Wright. Just curious what's come of that, and how if you've had a lot of interaction from other people in other communities who've been interested in the work that you did on, post mental health crisis and sisters.
I personally have not. I will get an email periodically. I wish they were here today because it's my understanding that MHA routinely goes to other communities and helps them not necessarily set up, pillar by pillar exactly what they've done, but gives them some general guidelines for what has worked for them. And so I know that they have had those conversations with other folks. I suspect that because we had the initial article, which was the kind of 6-month pilot study, and we're wrapping up, putting the finishing touches on the article that's our longitudinal, our 3-year study. And I think once that goes out, probably Police Quarterly is where we're thinking. I think we probably will start to see more interest. It's one thing to do it for 6 months and show results. It's quite another to say you're not going to see results for about a year. It's that long-term impact, and I think that's going to shake some people, and I think it's going to cause some people to realize that long-term investment in non-police alternatives is really where the money's going to be.
And I think there will be a recognition that it works because it's easy. And it is not an overwhelming price tag. But really what you need is a community partner like the MHA that is so invested in trying to make this a great place to live. And I think there will be people that will be adopting that model.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen.
Yes.
Bet.
We'll reconvene at 2:00.